Ludmilla continued her inspection of the village's construction in silence, uncertain what to say. The Volk, for his part, appeared content to follow and observe the goings-on around him. They crossed over the bridge into the common area of the village, where he drew the looks of everyone they passed. The scent of meals being prepared wafting from the various homes prodded her silently onward. After walking around all afternoon, she looked forward to returning home for dinner. After checking with Nonna one last time to see if there was any business to handle that had arrived since she had held court earlier in the day, she was back on the road headed to the harbor. Though the evening sun had already disappeared behind the valley's western ridge, its light still painted the cliffs across the river in a fiery evening glow. One of the pairs of Death Knights came up the road from the port village, returning to the logging camp to pick up their next shipment. The Volk tested the air as the row of undead beasts that followed passed. After the sounds of the undead procession faded in the distance, Ludmilla took a deep breath and decided to broach the subject of the missing ranger. "The ranger of yours that went missing," her voice came out carefully, "I am fairly certain it is dead." "Yes, that's what was reported," the Volk replied. "She remained behind to provide the opportunity for the others to escape, and was last seen fighting one of these Death Knights. She was a good friend who I had known since I was a lamb. Scrying for her did not turn up anything, so I considered it highly likely that she was no more." Awkward. "You have my apologies," she said. "I was not present when it happened, but the undead defenders here are under my orders. It is my responsibility." "This is your place, Warden," he said. "Stating the obvious is unnecessary. Apologies are also unnecessary. In this land, you maintain order and balance. If this is a result of that, then that is what it is. There is no reason to apologize for taking your place in the world, no reason to explain." "You are not angry that I killed your friend?" "Anger." The Volk seemed to mull over the word. "Our kind is not prone to anger. Her passing is unfortunate, but what is, is. If it makes you feel any better, if she was not slain, then I would not have come when I did. If I had not come when I did, then I would not have discovered the existence of a warden here. Druids and rangers serve a greater order, and to all things there is a time." Why was she the one being consoled instead? Again, Ludmilla understood what he was saying, but the Volk's calm acceptance of events seemed strangely fanatical in its own way. Ranger or druid or otherwise, one still felt grief and anger and pain that rose in reaction to death and loss. At least if they were human. "Being that it is what it is," he continued, "you will accede our request to become a part of this place?" "I do not believe it would cause any issues with the land itself," Ludmilla replied, "so, personally, I am inclined to agree." "There is a shadow that lies over your words." "There are some things that need to be arranged in order for your people to dwell in my territory for the long term," Ludmilla told the Volk. "You are right that, as a ranger, I serve the natural order of the world, but I am also a noble who serves another order." They continued forward for a short distance as the Volk stared absently into the sky. The quick, loping gait that he assumed to match her stride made the antlered ball of fluff bob up and down in rapid rhythm, but he showed no signs of fatigue. The eye on his forehead focused on her again. "Noble, this name is not expressed in any concept that is familiar to me." Ludmilla wondered if this was something that happened often when speaking to non-human races. The undead seemed to understand her perfectly fine. She thought for a moment, wondering how to convey what it meant. "You are aware of many races," she said. "Do the dwarves you mentioned not have this? The humans of Reistais to the north of your home certainly do." "We watch the world as it passes through magical means, yes," the Volk said, "but it is mostly visual observation that does not convey language." "I see, then, among my race, humans, it is a type of leader," Ludmilla told him. "Demi-human societies also have something similar, individuals that rise to power, who may oversee and direct many. You called me a lord of my race, it is very similar to that, as I have recently discovered." As she explained what it meant to the Volk, Ludmilla wondered why she had never considered it in such terms before. The abilities she was made aware of and explored in the past months certainly fell in line with those observed of demi-human lords. Considering how common the recognition of demi-human lords was, even amongst humans, the fault of this blindness was probably the result of human culture. Even without the faith of the six great gods, it now felt that the human cultures that she knew of promoted human exceptionalism almost uniformly. Humanity was held distinct from demi-humans and monsters, and this perception may very well be the thing that prevented nobles from consciously realizing abilities that lay dormant. If one framed humans along the same perception that humans had of demi-humans, Ludmilla was quite literally a human lord, stronger than the average human, and possessed of abilities that revolved around her leadership role. If not for being coaxed into this realization by Lady Shultier, a non-human being, she may have just lived her entire life not understanding this fundamental similarity. You were born as this, in the fashion of the Zien? The Volk asked, or is it something that manifests later, like with the tribes of the wilderness? I don't know anything about these Zien, but I was born a noble, Ludmilla answered. Most nobles are born, though it is not unheard of for those that distinguish themselves to become them as well. That is most peculiar. It is usually one or the other amongst the myriad species we have observed. Then, as a noble, what is this additional order that you serve? Nobles serve under their liege, another noble, who, in turn, serves under their own liege. The sovereign reigns over all, and it is through those that serve the sovereign that the order of the realm is established. I am a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom, my liege is Lady Shultier. Lady Shultier's liege is the sovereign, His Majesty the Sorcerer King, Ainzulgan. The existence of similar arrangements is known from our recollection of other peoples, the Volk said. It is not something we ourselves have, however, as we are all born with an understanding of the greater order of the world. I suppose to those races that do not, such individuals would manifest to manage them. What is it about this order that precludes us from becoming a part of your place? The order of the Sorceress Kingdom is mostly established through sets of laws that address appropriate conduct and limit or stop certain activities if they are perceived as undesirable. There are carnivorous species which exist here, such as ogres, but none share this same sort of mutual relationship that the Connos do. Due to concerns that some species might predate on others, a law was recently passed regarding this. The subjects of the Sorceress Kingdom are prohibited from devouring other subjects. But we would no longer be subjects, the Volk noted, just corpses. I do not think the law makes any such distinction between one and the other, Ludmilla said. There are laws regarding corpses, as well. I do not think it should take very long to accommodate your people's unique relationship. In the meanwhile, you may explore my territory to find a place suited for your people. We have already located such a place, the Volk replied, but we would have continued onwards if I had not encountered you here. You have? Yes, we have divined the path before us using magic. We know the layout of lands ahead before we actually arrive. This land was occupied by many strange things, which is why we sent rangers ahead to investigate. All right, Ludmilla said, where is this place that you wish to settle? Across this river, there is a place of many high meadows. Beyond, more people resembling your own in the green riverlands. Beyond that, a land where life and death are overturned, and the living feed on the undead. This place of high meadows is a part of your land? Her gaze turned to the towering cliffs beyond the Katza River. It technically was, but, due to the nature of human civilization, her claim was nominal at best. Holding land was not as simple as marking lines on a map. How much an administrator could control depended on whether they could project power over an area, and whether it was worthy of development, and the accompanying security costs were what actually determined whether one could assert de facto ownership over territory. It was extraordinarily rare for a noble to control every acre of de jure land that was marked as theirs on a map. Before the advent of the Sorceress Kingdom, only House Corlin, Wagner, Gonye and Vintner, whose territory had been abandoned after Katza, could claim such a feat in the duchy. They were all small, fully developed inner territories with the additional benefit of bordering the duchy capital. Perhaps the most famous example of this aspect of territorial control, regionally, was the Katza Plains. The Kingdom of Riestais, the Baharuth Empire and the Slain Theocracy all made de jure claims over the vast territory which, if not for being an cursed wasteland dominated by the undead, should have been a fertile river basin which provided access to the inland sea in the southeast. Yet none of these nations was capable of retaining their hold on the area, nor were they able to cleanse the cursed lands, not even the Slain Theocracy. What resulted was an empty and barren plain that each of the three nations had marked as theirs on each of their own maps, though no one actually held it. All that the ridiculous claim amounted to was a point to rattle swords over in diplomacy, often used as a convenient excuse to hold the annual skirmish between Riestais and the Empire. The mountains between Warden's Vale and what was now Calling County came with a set of challenges which resulted in a similar situation. Rheastais have claimed the range as a part of their kingdom on the maps, but even as it was passed along to the Sorceress Kingdom with the rest of Iranthal, access was extremely limited from both sides. It was a wild, alpine area, inhospitable to humans without exorbitant investment, so none actually lived there. As House Zaradnik was the closest frontier territory, it was nominally in her sphere of influence, but no attempts at projecting power over it were made even at the height of Rheastais' expansion in the region. It was uncontested by the theocracy, so if the Chronos occupied the area as her subjects, then it would be both de jure and de facto a part of her land. With their assistance, some development and exploration might be possible as well. "I will extend my management over the range if you wish to move there," she said after thinking on her reply. "How long would it be until your people arrive?" "Once we have your leave to become a part of this land, Warden, they should arrive over the course of 2 or 3 months." "Will they be in danger from this evil that drove you from your land?" "We have scryed the places we left behind," the Volk replied. "Of any pursuit, there is no sign." "Then what of the other peoples that fled?" Ludmilla asked. "You mentioned that there were many affected by this evil star." "They would not enter the mountains," the Volk answered. "It is faster to flee through the hills and forests to the east." Ludmilla frowned worriedly at his words. While the Abelian wilderness was often thought of a savage and uncivilized place, the truth was it was home to probably millions of demi-humans of various species. Any strong displacement between the tribes would result in widespread consequences both within the wilderness and to the nations that bordered it. While the theocracy might have the strength to handily weather such an event, others might not. As the defender of the Reach, House Zaradnik was charged with guarding the realm against any of the waves arriving at the border as a result of this disturbance. In the worst-case scenario, she would be facing a mass migration that boiled down through the upper reaches and over the passes. If the demi-humans were aware of the strength of the theocracy and opted to avoid a confrontation with them, this might very well be the case. "How long do you think it will take them to come to the range running south that you passed by on the way to this place?" she asked. "That is difficult to say," the Volk answered. "They are a multitude of tribes of various forms, there are even small confederations. If one group rushes into another, they may both flee, or they may fight if one side does not recognize the threat coming from the west." He had a point. The potential numbers that would arrive at her borders might not be as great as she thought. While those who had been directly affected by whatever had befallen the western portions of the Abelian wilderness might share the same fears, those in the way who were unaware of it would have varying reactions to the intrusion upon their lands. Some might listen and flee as well, or at least allow those fleeing to pass. Some might see it as a challenge to their territorial claims and a war would result. Rather than being one huge migration, the waves would likely become erratic ripples which arrived over a much longer span of time. This would still be a problem for her to deal with, but at least she thought it would be manageable. While she had few doubts over whether the forces of the Sorceress Kingdom could defeat these demi-humans in open conflict, tracking down so many and keeping them from spilling over into the realm was another thing entirely. If they arrived slowly, and in limited numbers, it would be much easier to intercept and contain them. Ludmilla had looked forward to relaxing during the evening while she absorbed the information about the new aerial transportation network, but, now, she had a whole new thing to worry over. "My liege should be visiting within a day or two," Ludmilla said as they descended the slope to the bridge. "I will speak with her about your request and, if she believes there will not be any issues, we can have your people begin their move across the river. Are you able to stay overnight? It would be prudent to have you stay for her arrival, just in case she has any further questions for you." Their journey paused when Ludmilla saw the Volk stop at the edge of the wooden bridge to sniff around. Though greatly diminished as spring gave way to summer, the level of the Katza River was still high enough to overflow into the floodplains. After several minutes, the Volk returned from his sampling of the surroundings, eyeing the hill where the village stood over the harbor. "There shouldn't be any issue with this place for tonight," the Volk told her. "If there are predators here, it's probably best to warn them from trying to eat me." "The village is just humans, undead and the birds," Ludmilla replied. "Do you require any shelter?" "No. My kind are accustomed to sleeping in the open." They made their way into the village entrance, where several of her new migrants roughly paid their respects even as they warily watched the strange creature walking alongside her. The Volk appeared to be able to look in nearly every direction at once, taking in the details of the settlement and its occupants while asking questions that touched on everything it saw in seemingly random order. The pair stopped at the warehouse, where Jeeves was walking up and down the aisles with a stepladder. He straightened and turned after Ludmilla knocked on the doorframe of the building. "Good evening, Lady Zaradnik," he said in his usual, cheery tone. "Gem, is this a new product?" Ludmilla glanced down at the Volk in alarm over his question, quickly producing a reply. "His people have petitioned to migrate here," she said. "They are composed of two races, the other is a beastman-type demi-human that resembles a large feline." Jeeves bowed deeply to the Volk, and Ludmilla could not help but think the miniature skeleton was just the right size to ride the Kronos druid around. She mentally waved away the image before her mind started adding other features. "My most sincere apologies," Jeeves said. "Some of the villagers asked about livestock today, so I could not help but draw the association. Still, given the similarities, are certain products actually possible? Do you shed your coats, for instance?" "We do," the Volk's ears twitched. "When the cold weather abates, we shed our coats, they grow back before winter." "What happens to your wool?" Ludmilla's interest was piqued. "We rub it off on hard surfaces," the Volk said. "The wind will blow it away, eventually." "It appears your hunch was correct, Jeeves," Ludmilla said. "It must be those merchant senses at work." "I have merchant senses? I suppose I must." Jeeves looked at the Kronos druid thoughtfully. "I just recognized a potential source of goods that are notably absent in our inventories and trade ledgers. Does anything else, come off?" "We shed our horns around the same time as our coats." The Volk's ears twitched again. "They are left where they fall." "Another product?" Jeeves mused. "I have no knowledge of crafting recipes, so I suppose you will have to ask around about that, my lady. Also, we cast our droppy." "Okay, we should move on," Ludmilla cut in. "Let Nonna know about those additional queries, Jeeves. I will get back to them in a few days." She led the Volk back outside before Jeeves could try picking up on another potential Kronos product, and continued on their way through the village terraces. Ostrich Kovalev stood over his makeshift workshop, overseeing the apprentices who were carrying loads of charcoal towards the back. One of the children stopped and stared in her direction, causing the smith to also turn his attention towards her, then down at the Volk. "Oh, Lady Zaradnik," he said with a slight bow. "Didn't hear you coming. Guess we're finally gonna get mutton around here, eh? You too?" Ludmilla wondered if every merchant and shopkeeper saw things the same way. Perhaps she was a potential product or some sort of marketing opportunity in their eyes as well. Now that she thought about it, her friends did so as well. If an unknown object was placed before Clara, Leanne, and Florine, they would debate over its worth and try to figure out how it could be turned to economic advantage. "This is a Volk of the Kronos," she explained. "His people have petitioned to join us. They are composed of this race and the demi-human from the other day." "That's, not going to be a problem, is it?" "We have already discussed the matter," Ludmilla replied, and the Volk's ears twitched. "They will still be moving in, pending my consultation with Lady Schultier." "Hun," Ostrich grunted. "Well, that's pretty big-hearted. You too, my lady. I thought followers of the Six were supposed to be all hateful of non-humans." Was everyone trying to put cracks into her new relationship with the Kronos? Ostrich cleared his throat as Ludmilla's mood darkened. Anyways," he said, "you're just in time." "In time for what?" "We've built a new sort of smelter, we're just finishing loading it up right now." Ostrich motioned for her to follow, leading them to the back of the forge area. A long structure, which she assumed to be some sort of storage bin when she had seen it on previous visits, was filled with charcoal. The row of vents along the side glowed a bright orange and flames licked out from the top. Two of the smith's apprentices watched from nearby with baskets of charcoal on hand, topping off the level of fuel as it burned and fell away. "What is it?" Ludmilla asked. "A wind furnace." The smith had a proud look on his face as he stared down at the contraption. "Since the winds from the north are so damn consistent and funnel right into the end of the valley here, I figured I'd give it a shot." "Oh, this guy looks pretty flammable," Might want to stand away a bit or you'll turn into a ball of fire. Our coats are not known for catching fire, the Volk replied. I cannot recall any of our accountings portraying such a thing. Well, aren't you a little bundle of value, Ostrich said. Let me know if you knit an apron, I'll be your first customer. Knit? The Volk tilted its head up at the blacksmith, and Ostrich looked to her. We have plenty of time to think over those things after the Kronos settle themselves, Ludmilla said. So what are the benefits of this wind furnace? How does it work? Ostrich walked back to his portable forge, grabbing a fire iron from where it was hanging from a hook. He returned and started gesturing to various parts of the wind furnace. These are tires, air ducts, basically. He pointed to the row of ports along the side. The wind we got coming from the north all the time passed over the top of the furnace, which draws air through the tires and up through the fuel. It keeps the flames consistently stoked to high temperatures, high enough to produce steel inside. About half that comes out of this is iron, the other half some of the highest quality steel I've ever seen, at least if I got the damn thing built right. Is this your first time using one of these? Ludmilla asked. Nah, it's something I saw a few years ago. Ostrich waved his fire iron vaguely in the distance. Far to the southeast, way beyond the theocracy, the Dragonic Kingdom, and the meaner demi-human nations around there, there's an empire of tiger beastmen that are famous for their metallurgy. That trip took me a good 2 years, actually. Took a ship from a port past the Dragonic Kingdom, sailed for 3 months and ended up in some crazy hot place full of jungles and huge cities that make what we have here look like child's play. Anyways, a few of these cities are designated as trade cities, where many races come together to do business. They're really strict about enforcing everything there. If you're caught outside of the designated locations, you might become a snack. Hey. They have techniques for mithril and adamantite alloys as well, but this was as much as the smith I met was willing to show an outsider. All throughout his lessons, I got the sense that he was just doling out charity to a pitiful primitive. I can't say he was wrong either. What they do out there is way beyond anything I've seen around this part of the world. The smith reached out and grabbed a flask sitting on a stump nearby, uncapping it and taking a long draught. Seeing that it'll still be a while before we get a regular forge set up, I went ahead and built this so we can get good steel flowing sooner rather than later. Hell, I might have a permanent one of these set up in the end anyways. Does that mean you will not be needing the undead laborers? Ludmilla asked. If this wind furnace works out, I'll only have one of these clay bloomeries running just to make sure these brats know how to build and use one, so Bellows' work will be limited. Then they'll be free to start learning how to work metal. Once we start turning out enough steel and iron, the apprentices will start putting out simple things in a week or 2. I got some other ideas that I want to try putting to use, but that'll have to wait until the buildings in the harbor here start coming up. I see, she said. Do you have any recommendations for the steel that we produce? Tools, definitely, Ostrich told her. The majority of my time is split between replacing the cast iron tools that break, and making iron nails and such for the ongoing construction work. Once we start putting out steel equipment, I'll have a lot more time to focus on other things you might want to see done. Converting all the broken cast iron stuff that's been piling up into even more steel will probably be the first thing. You have my permission to go ahead with that, then. Will there be any changes to the amount of fuel or ore that you need delivered? We haven't even put a dent into the bog or in the marsh. There's so much of it built up here that I don't expect shortages anytime soon. However, since the wind furnace is much larger and burns hotter than these bloomeries we've been using, we'll definitely be going through more charcoal. Seeing how much timber is building up on the flats, I figured that wouldn't be a problem for the next little while. Very well, Ludmilla nodded. Once you determine your new requirements, make sure Jeeves is updated. Will do, my lady, Ostrich bowed slightly. She gave the new wind furnace one last, long, look before turning to continue on her way. The vague worries that had been tugging at her became stronger as they approached her manor where the Death Knight and its squire zombie continued to stand their silent vigil. Covering the remaining distance in silence, she stopped on the lane in front of the manor as the Volk stepped forward towards the squire zombie. He turned his head up to look at the massive figure, then sniffed at it several times, ears twitching. A moment passed before he turned around and walked back to her. It is the likeness of my friend, he confirmed. This one was made by the other from her remains? Yes, she replied, it is one of their abilities. Death Knights create squire zombies from the corpses of those that they personally slay. I see, his ears twitched again. It is not unlike the ways of some other undead beings. Okay, before we continue, I really have to ask, what does it mean when you twitch your ears like that? Like this? The Volk twitched his ears in the same way as before. Yes, like that, Ludmilla said. It is making me nervous because after you witness or hear something I think might be offensive to you, your ears twitch and I half expect the entire hill to explode into flames. In this context and fashion, it is an expression signifying agreement or acceptance. There are other meanings to your ears twitching? Why, yes. He replied, is your own body language so singular? I guess not, Ludmilla admitted. Then that means you are really alright with this zombie squire in the form of your friend? I know many of my kind have the belief that their souls are bound to undying servitude when the undead are raised from their bodies. That sounds quite silly, the Volk bleated strangely. The delusion of a primitive and unlearned people. Such a thing is not so commonplace. There are many sorts of undead, most appear in a simplistic, single-minded state, a scant few may be powerful enough to manifest their own intellect and identity. There are also those who are raised to serve their summoners, usually in a temporary way. None of these do such a thing as bind the soul of another. The living may very rarely continue in this world as one of the undead through preparations and conditions which facilitate the passing from one form to the next. There are those who return from beyond the threshold of death, where the will of the soul itself is so strong that they anchor themselves in the great cycle and the world exceeds to accommodate their purpose. With the apparently well-learned Volk saying this, people threatening to haunt others out of spite didn't seem like a joke or an empty promise. It was just a piece of folklore, though. She had never heard of anyone actually coming back from the dead to enact some grim vengeance or something along those lines. Your people certainly know a lot about the world, Ludmilla noted. It is hard to imagine coming into all that knowledge dwelling in the same mountain range for countless ages. Being in the same place for your entire life tends to have one looking beyond, the Volk said. We happen to have the magic to do so without ever leaving our homes, and our knowledge is passed on through those countless ages. Then what about vampires? Ludmilla asked. The ones who they feed on will turn into vampires themselves, do they not? This is a subject which is currently undergoing debate, he answered. It is one of a few rare cases of a victim's soul genuinely being enslaved and turned into one of the undead. Yet, in the case where a vampire releases their hold on such a soul turned to unlife, those newly freed slaves tend to not immediately end themselves. So was the soul actually enslaved? Or was it willing in some small way, tempted by means through which only vampires know how? Vampires are quite rare, but maybe one day we will come across one and find out. Well, your people have apparently studied the undead for a long time, Ludmilla said, looking away slightly. What's one more day? Tap tap. Thunk tap. A strange sound issued from somewhere, and Ludmilla opened her eyes to the sight of Amelia sitting on her own bed, getting dressed. It wasn't her, however, so she turned over to face the living area of the manor, trying to figure out what the noise was. There was no light against the table. It appeared that dawn had not broken yet. Since she still had several hours until she needed to wake up and prepare for Lady Shortier's arrival, Ludmilla decided to stay in bed. Suppressing her alert nature was a difficult thing, but, after several weeks of living with Amelia in Warden's Vale, she had mostly adjusted to her maid's presence and could return to a restful sleep again. Thunk thunk tap thunk. Scrape. Scrape. Tap 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 thunk thunk. Scrape. Well, she could have, if not for that noise. The events of the past day had made her sensitive to the goings-on around her again. Ludmilla was almost certain it was the Kronos walking around on the roof of the hall. She relaxed and kept her eyes shut, but the more she tried to ignore the sound the more wakefulness returned to her. Lutzi. She was too lethargic to even spare the extra 2 syllables. Yes, my lady, her maid replied as she knelt before the fireplace, getting the cook fire started and lighting the lamps. Go to the outside, Ludmilla mumbled, and tell the Volk not to be stomping on my roof so damn early. The priest? The floof on the roof. Amelia's footfalls left the kitchen area and receded down through the hall, and Ludmilla turned back over. The door opened and the sounds of the village outside leaked in before it quietly closed again. "Oh my, you really are Floofy," her maid's voice sounded through the wall. "Excuse me, Floofer, priest." "Volk," he bleated in correction. "Yes, I just said that," Amelia said. "You are disturbing my lady's rest by walking all over the roof at this hour." Thunk tap thunk tap thunk tap tap thunk thunk. Ludmilla heard the light thump as the chronostruid landed in front of the hall. She buried herself under the covers, half aware of Amelia's return to the kitchen. There should be at least 2 more precious hours of sleep left. "Ludmilla?" Just as she dozed off, Lady Shiltier's voice sounded in her mind. "Ludmilla? Did I mess this up somehow?" If you don't know how, all you need to do to respond is just 5 more minutes. 5 minutes? I'm not sure if the message scroll lasts that long. "Lady Shiltier, you have already come?" I thought. No, this is a message spell. Why do you sound so tired? Are you sick? Do you have a debuff? Should I come over and cure you? We have much to do today, so you can't be out of form. She shifted in her bed and stretched. To her embarrassment, the sound of her voice while she did so was conveyed through the message spell. "Ludmilla? What was that strange noise? That sounded a bit, actually, I'll be right there." "It was nothing, my lady. You messaged me while I was in bed. Your voice popped up in my head while I was asleep." Ludmilla wondered if this was what Moranbor felt like, being assailed by so many people through message spells. Shouldn't there be some sort of etiquette for it? "I see. What was that cute little noise, then?" "I was stretching, my lady. Please forget about it. How may I be of service?" "Why would I want to forget ahem? I just thought I'd call ahead to let you know that I've arranged the appointment with Cocytus. It shouldn't take more than a few hours, so we'll do the rest of our work in the afternoon. I'll arrive at your place at the time we agreed on." "Very well, I will begin preparations for an audience. Would it be appropriate to have Lutzi accompany us?" Yes, actually. There's little to speak of in the way of civilized comforts there, so your maid might come in handy." "We will be ready, my lady." "I'll see you then." Ludmilla felt the message spell end and she propped herself up in a seated position against the wall, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. The spell felt very similar to her own ability, so she wondered why there was such a disparity in range. "Amelia." "Yes, my lady?" "Lady Shiltier just contacted me," Ludmilla told her maid. "We will be attending an audience with Lord Cocytus after she arrives." "What shall I prepare?" Amelia asked. "I have no idea actually," she admitted. "Lady Shiltier mentioned something about civilized comforts. I think we will be heading to that demi-human town in the Great Forest of Tob. We should not require much, maybe add a change of clothes just in case." "I'll figure something out, my lady." Ludmilla forced herself out of bed and threw on the robe laid out on her elder brother's mattress. She yawned, stretched again and shuffled through the kitchen and the hall, opening the door. Greeting her outside was the sight of the Volk, tearing a clump of moss off of the wall with his teeth. "The day's greetings to you, Warden." His voice was somehow perfectly clear even as he chewed on a mouthful of moss at the same time. "Is something the matter?" "That clump of moss has been growing there since my father was a child," Ludmilla frowned. "Oh. Were you saving it for a special occasion?" He stopped chewing, and looked about to spit it out. "No," she said hurriedly. "I just never thought someone would just walk by and eat it off of the wall one day." "The flavor is quite well developed," he resumed chewing. "You would like some, perhaps?" "My race does not usually eat moss," Ludmilla told him. "Lady Shiltier will be here in a bit over an hour, but we have some business to attend to elsewhere. I would like to at least introduce you to her before we head off." "What is an hour?" "Well, no matter, I will be here." Ludmilla looked over the village and the valley beyond. Noting nothing amiss, Ludmilla went back into the manor. At the appointed time, the familiar portal of the gate spell manifested in the manor hall and Lady Shiltier appeared. The escorting Hanzos stirred in her shadow, but they did not leave it. "Good morning, Lady Shiltier," Ludmilla curtsied in greeting. "Good morning, Lady Zaradnik," her liege replied. "Are we ready to go?" "Am I presentable?" Ludmilla asked as she rose. Lady Sheltier's crimson gaze ran over her, and she leaned from one side to the other in the confined space. Ludmilla was wearing the same outfit that she had worn on the visit to the farming village and the logging camp. Amelia had managed to quickly clean it up again after her encounter with the Kronos the previous day. There shouldn't be any problems, Lady Sheltier told her, unless Cocytus asks for something silly. Something silly? Ludmilla furrowed her brow. Your guess is as good as mine, Lady Sheltier shrugged. Better than mine, probably, considering how alike you two are. I see. Well, I cannot imagine anything asking for anything crazy in this situation, though I suppose it depends on what he wishes to see me for. Amelia stirred to her side, moving to pack up the preparations she had made. Before we get going, my lady, Ludmilla said, there is someone I would like for you to meet outside. Oh? Her liege raised an eyebrow. I don't recall any mention of this during the message. Apologies, my lady, she lowered her head. I was still half asleep at the time. That you were, Lady Sheltier smiled. You sound very different in bed, by the way. That is, we should get this introduction out of the way so we can get to this audience with Lord Cocytus. I just thought you should meet him, we can discuss his business later today. Leading Lady Sheltier outside, Ludmilla looked around for the Volk. The Kronos druid had meandered over to the Lynam residence, where he was grazing morsels off of their wall. Lady Sheltier looked down curiously at the small, sheep-like creature as they caught up with him. I believe this is more Aura's specialty, she said. At the sound of Lady Sheltier's voice, the Volk turned his attention towards them. Lady Sheltier, Ludmilla said, this is a Volk of the Kronos people. Volk, Lady Sheltier Bloodfallen, my liege, and Minister of Transportation of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. The Volk bobbed its head once before speaking. I had assumed your liege was another human noble, Warden, he said. It appears that one more day was not so long to wait, after all. Greetings on behalf of the Kronos. Do they not use names as we do? Lady Sheltier looked up at her. You were called by some sort of title, you used one for him as well. They convey their identities in a very complete manner, my lady, Ludmilla said. A little while after we met, we settled on using titles for my own benefit. I am uncertain what they will come up with for you. The Kronos desire to migrate into Warden's Vale, but, as Warden's Vale is a territory of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, several aspects of their unique culture lie at odds with our laws. It will probably be a lengthy discussion. I believed it would be best to be at least aware of their presence, just in case you recognized any immediate issues. We have all sorts of problems getting the surrounding nations to like us, Lady Sheltier said, yet here you are with outsiders coming to you on their own. Rather than having any concerns, I'm curious, just what are you using to bait them in? Don't tell me Aura let you use her Kalkan. I have not used any bait, as far as I know. Ludmilla had no idea what Kalkan was. They first arrived while we were away. As for what caused them to appear, it is yet another thing I need to discuss with you after the appointment with Lord Cocytus. The door to the manor opened, and Amelia appeared with a light bag over her shoulder. Lady Sheltier looked over to the approaching maid. I see, she said. Well, if you believe that it isn't an immediately pressing concern, it's best to get this business with Lord Cocytus over with. We will see you in the afternoon, Ludmilla told the Volk as Lady Sheltier opened a new gate. I have informed the undead here of your presence, so feel free to explore a bit if you wish. Also, some children may try and pet you, but please don't light them on fire. They stepped through the new portal, into a cavernous chamber which appeared to be fashioned out of solid stone. To her right was a window carved into the wall, under which a potted tree stretched towards the light streaming in from outdoors. Its imbalanced look bothered her a bit. Don't move the plant, Lady Sheltier warned as Ludmilla peered down at it with a frown. Someone turned the pot once, to have the tree grow back the other way. A few hours later, there was a mare-sized hole in the wall. Ludmilla backed away and fell into line behind Lady Sheltier. They made their way across the polished stone floor, to a long carpet that stretched between the entrance of the building and some sort of statue placed on what appeared to be an altar further inside. There were a number of non-human beings awaiting them, 2 rows of 3 reptilian demi-humans arranged on either side of 2 insectoid creatures that stood upright. Standing between them was another insectoid, distinctly different in form and massive in stature, who towered over everyone. sheathed in an exoskeleton of muted blue plates which glimmered under a fine mist that wafted off of its form. It measured their approach with a set of glistening compound eyes. Forearms extended from its shoulders and torso, ending in powerful claws, one which held a huge, silvery halberd of incalculable quality that matched its mighty appearance. It suddenly exhaled from between the mouthparts behind its large mandibles, a hissing blast of frozen air that raised gooseflesh from where they stood over 4 meters away. "You've come." The being's voice was deep and gravelly. The air seemed to freeze and crackle with its breath as it spoke. Amelia's muted gasp came from behind her. "Indeed," Lady Sheltier replied as they came forward. "By your request, I've brought Baroness Ludmilla Zarodnik. Baroness Cocytus, member of the royal court and lord of the Great Lake." Ludmilla lowered her head as Lady Sheltier introduced them, spreading her skirts in a deep curtsy. "It is my pleasure to finally make your acquaintance, Lord Cocytus," she said. "Duty has kept me indisposed recently, but I have looked forward to our meeting ever since your first mention by Lady Sheltier." Throughout her greeting, she keenly felt the gazes of the demi-humans upon her, and she resisted the urge to check why they were doing so. She studied the rich carpet at her feet instead as she awaited Lord Cocytus' response. "Sheltier. This one, you trained?" "Oh no," Lady Sheltier replied lightly, "she was always this way." Another blast of frigid air frosted over the ground between them, and she watched it melt away as a long silence passed between them with no discernible movement. Still lowered in her greeting, Ludmilla had no sense of what was going on. "Welcome," he finally said. "Raise your heads." She rose, only to see the massive ice crystals jutting from the back of Lord Cocytus as he strode away with the 2 insectoid creatures following alongside him. There was a small, pained sound behind her as Amelia straightened herself as well. They had been frozen in their curtsies for several minutes, and it must have strained her maid quite a bit. Unsure what had instigated the extended greeting, Ludmilla looked to Lady Sheltier worriedly. "Cocytus is quite the competitive fellow," Lady Sheltier told her in a low voice as they left the 2 rows of demi-humans behind them. "He's been trying to teach his subjects here what he considers proper protocol, with varying degrees of success." "Is that why all those demi-humans were staring at me the entire time, my lady?" Ludmilla replied in an equally low voice as she made an active effort to not look over her shoulder. "Perhaps. You're far superior to any of his subjects in courtly behavior. They're probably in for it now after he witnessed your demonstration." "I did not realize that I was going to be used as a demonstration." "Well, Cocytus is the sort that will suddenly latch onto ideas he finds appealing." Lady Sheltier smiled slightly. "I'd wager that if he saw those fortified villages you're putting up, the lake would end up having castles springing up all around it within a week." "Is the Great Lake not surrounded by wetlands and forest, my lady?" Ludmilla tried to accurately recall what she had written down 2 days previous. "There were no apparent sources of stone here mentioned in our review." "Well, there was at least one large block of stone somewhere around here," Lady Sheltier told her, "though I think they might have used it to make this building. As for the rest of what he needs, it would hardly matter. Cocytus is very direct. He'd end up personally cutting a path straight through the hills and mountains to get what he wants." According to the maps provided in their planning for the aerial transportation network, the Great Lake over which Lord Cocytus ruled was near the foot of the Azalisia Mountains. There were no known roads for wheeled traffic which led through the region, so moving anything by land presented severe challenges. Ludmilla was unable to fathom how quickly one would need to personally cut a road so that castles would rise around the lake within a week of doing so. Ahead of them, Lord Cocytus and the 2 shorter insectoids were genuflecting before the large statue set on the altar at the back of the building. A variety of things, raw food, flowers, simple crafts and some other objects she was unfamiliar with, were neatly arranged around it. Lady Sheltier walked up to stand beside Lord Cocytus before she lowered herself into an elegant curtsy. Ludmilla followed suit behind her liege, and there was a rustling of skirts behind Ludmilla. Then there was an entirely unfamiliar sound beyond that. With the air as tense and solemn as it was, the noise seemed a bit out of place. When Lady Sheltier rose, Ludmilla stood and glanced behind her. Past Amelia, she saw that the 6 demi-humans had followed them. They had lowered themselves into kneeling postures as well, tails laid flat against the floor. Seeing that both Lady Sheltier and Lord Cocytus had paid their respects before it, Ludmilla assumed that the statue could be none other than a likeness of His Majesty, the Sorcerer King, Ainzulgaon. It was the first time Ludmilla had any idea about the appearance of her new sovereign. Looking up at the masterfully graven image, which held an ornate staff out a grand gesture, she wondered how close of a likeness it was. The sound of a massive form shifting around drew her attention away from the statue. Lord Cocytus had turned to address them. "Come," he said. "This place, I will show you."